Okay, we'll start with this. Well, Michaela Mayer very recently was asked, will she be in the new ESBC boxing game? To which she replied, no, I don't give away my likeness for free. The women's contract for ESBC game was non-negotiable, while the men's was negotiable. My manager, George Ruiz, has trained me well. Know your worth. To which trainer and manager extraordinaire Steffi Bull replied, interesting, Terry gets the same pay as male world champions. Know your worth. Clarissa Shields chimed in and said, sorry to hear that, Michaela Mayer, but I'm getting paid to be in the game. My contract definitely was negotiable. It would be easy to use this as a segue to some very familiar themes in reference to the sport of women's boxing and how any press is good press at this point. Any publicity is good publicity for an American female fighter, female boxer like Michaela Mayer, because they simply aren't getting the same coverage and exposure that the male fighters are getting, or even the same coverage and exposure that the female fighters are getting across the Atlantic Ocean over there in the United Kingdom. It would be very easy to use this as a conversation piece for that discussion. But to Michaela Mayer's point, y'all want me to just do it for exposure because I'm a female, but no. To say that the men's contracts have been negotiated, but the women's are set, and it's this or nothing, is not okay to me. I've been doing deals with George Ruiz for 8 years. I know a ripoff when I see one.
We can use this to talk about equal pay.
Or fair pay, as it is sometimes referred to in the sport of women's boxing. We can do that. We can rehatch that same old tired conversation, or we can get straight to the point. This isn't about every other female boxer that's out there. This is about Michaela Mayer. And if to Michaela,
no money,
being involved with this ESBC game does not represent some kind of financial value of some kind, then there's no reason for her to do it. There's no reason to lend her likeness to this game, which hasn't come out yet, by the way. I mean, nothing against the ESBC people, but I've been paying close attention to this story since it has been a long time since there was some sort of game, boxing game on a console, on a platform for boxing fans. Long gone are the days of Fight Night and Fight Night Champions.
It's been a decade.
It's been 10 years roughly since Fight Night was first released in March 1st of 2011. We haven't seen any other games like it since then. And this ESBC game might spark the curiosity of not only the boxing fan, but the gamers as well. It's just that I haven't actually seen any gameplay.
Seen still images.
And we've been hearing about this game for months. It feels like we've been hearing about this game for at least a year.
Still no gameplay, though.
Which I'd say is pretty important. Perhaps even more important than capturing the likeness of a Clarissa Shields, of a Michaela Mayer, because you're still trying to grow the sport of women's boxing as a whole in this country. So if you're a game developer, what is paramount is getting the gameplay down as opposed to getting the likeness of fighters down. And that's all we've really been hearing as of late. Several fighters, some very familiar faces, Conor Benn among them.
They've lended their likeness to the ESBC game.
But when do we actually get to play it? How close are we, or how close aren't we to a release date? Because you're going to have all these fighters lending their intellectual property, their very likeness to your ESBC game. It comes as no benefit to them until the game is released, when a profit can actually be turned over, and that hasn't happened yet. We don't know when that's going to happen, but what we do know is you want to use the likeness of several well-known boxers, Michaela Mayer among them, and I'm curious as to what's in the fine print.
What other entitlements are part of the agreement?
To some degree, the people at the ESBC might have the rights to use the likeness of several prominent boxers out there, but how far out there does that extend?
Any other entitlements that gives them?
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not calling the people over there at the ESBC a bunch of scam and flim-flam artists. I'm just saying that at this time, there's a lot that we don't know. And we are talking about someone's intellectual property, their likeness. That basically makes them a spokesperson for your game.
When is the release date for your game?
We've seen many familiar faces, many still images, some video footage of what the game is supposed to look like and its graphics, and it all looks very promising, though not very tangible. I understand if Michaela Mayer is looking at all of this with some skepticism and reserves the right to protect her intellectual property.
Because if it all turns out okay,
If everything that needs to check out does check out, then moving forward, Michaela Mayer can do business with the people over there at the ESBC. But until that happens, reserving the right to protect your likeness and your intellectual property, well, that's very fiscally responsible. And that's the feeling I get here.
there's nothing wrong with covering all the bases.
Well, you can tell me that Terry Harpier and Josh Taylor and Shannon Courtenay and Canelio Alvarez, you can tell me that all these individuals have decided to lend their likeness to the game, so who's Michaela Mayer to reserve the right to protect her intellectual property? Well, when they eat, she doesn't shit, last I checked. Now, as far as Michaela's version of the story, as opposed to Claricia's, negotiable and or non-negotiable contracts, set terms, what have you, I think those two girls need to get on the phone with each other, touch base, and trade notes.
If Clarissa felt comfortable enough to deal with these people,
What young Michaela needs to do is find out why that is. What did the people at the ESBC tell Claricia exactly that made her feel comfortable enough to deal with them that they didn't tell Michaela?
Are you confident we see that undisputed fight?
Well, what else is there? There's nothing else, Andy, in the whole wide world. I'm sick to death of looking at boxing because of the politics in it. It's not enjoyable anymore. The only fight I want to see is AJ. That's the only heavyweight fight I'm interested in seeing is AJ. You know, I can look at others and enjoy them, but when it's to do with my son, I want to see the biggest fight in boxing history between two Brits. Not some twerker from USA putting his spanner in the works on his people. Politics of boxing. Let's just say the mafia of boxing. They've had the say, and that's why we're in the position we're in now. And I'll speak the truth, me. Mafia of boxing's reared its ugly head and interfering with things, aren't they? Because they're after the biggest prize and the richest prize in sport, staying in America, which I don't blame them. I don't blame them. But this just looks like a mission to me to deprive Tyson of his WBC belt. You know, because last time, take a look at it. All American judges, American referee, in America. Tyson's got to knock him out to get a frigging draw, you know. So why would you go over there to do that? I know they pay big money, but they'd have to. Because if it wasn't getting big money for doing it, you wouldn't want to go there, would you?
Seems that Big John Fury is convinced that clandestine forces are at work against his son, Tyson Fury, and he still feels raw about the Anthony Joshua fight dematerializing and the Deontay Wilder trilogy rematerializing.
views the Joshua fight as the bigger fight.
It's all about the dollars, isn't it? And who can put arse on seats and generate the most income? And I'd say it was AJ and Tyson. Tyson AJ. Not the rest of it. Even though they're trying to make it the rest of it, no one's really interested.
Do you hear that? Are you paying attention? According to Big John Fury, the big fight, the money fight, that's the AJ fight. That's the fight that puts asses in the seats. As far as this one, nobody's interested in this one. And that's not coming from me, a YouTuber, some content creator on some social media platform. No, it's coming from Big John Fury, the father of Tyson Fury. Seems Big John Fury has been disgruntled ever since news broke that Tyson Fury would not be facing Anthony Joshua, would be facing Deontay Wilder instead, and he's convinced that clandestine forces are at work, and they might perhaps be against Tyson Fury.
Why else would he be saying things like the mafia of boxing?
Big John Fury ain't telling you nothing here in this boxing social interview that I haven't told you before. The bigger fight is the Joshua fight. I mean, you don't see Saudi Arabian royalty putting up millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to stage Wilder versus Fury 3.
The guaranteed purses to the fighters ain't gonna be no 75 million.
Of course not. Those are the guarantees for what would have been the Joshua versus Fury fight. The guarantees for the Wilder trilogy will be considerably smaller than the kind of money Fury would have made fighting Anthony Joshua.
Because that's the bigger fight.
Not this one. Not this fight. When it comes to this fight has left a lot of boxing fans feeling disillusioned, disenfranchised, and disappointed. For more reasons than one. They're disappointed because the undisputed heavyweight title fight ain't happening. But beyond that, you got all of this COVID stuff going on that people aren't even sure they should believe.
Test positive, so the fight gets postponed.
Postponed for roughly 3 months, only so that a few days later, after having tested positive, he tests negative and he's on a flight back home. And this is after he's seen gallivanting around Las Vegas, renting luxury cars.
So did the guy have COVID or did he not have COVID?
I mean, listen to the story. Listen to Bob Arum's explanation. Tyson Fury got the first jab, the first shot, but he didn't follow up to get the second shot. And he didn't get the second shot because he was afraid it would make him sick. Only for him to get sick because he didn't get the second shot!
Fucking morons.
This is like something out of an episode of Full House. This is supposed to be some kind of major fight, multi-million-dollar fight, millions upon millions of dollars on the line, only for what is now being relegated to a minor snafu.
That's how they want to make it seem now.
That is their explanation for Joseph Parker, who was said to have contracted COVID along with Tyson Fury in Tyson Fury's camp. That's their explanation for why Joseph was at a UFC event and why Tyson Fury is gallivanting around Las Vegas without a care in the world.
Right, luxury cars.
The entire fiasco, as it were, is now being relegated to being a minor snafu. And if you put the whole thing together, you're telling me that this multi-million-dollar fight
Due to the sniffles.
has been postponed 3 months due to what is a minor snafu?
Boys, Tyson Fury had a scratchy throat.
I think it all wraps itself up a little bit too neatly, and even if, by some chance, it's exactly the way they're saying it is, that doesn't change people's minds. A lot of people have grown suspicious as to what's actually going on here, whether or not they should trust Tyson Fury and Bob Arum, the arbitrator's ruling, which came down right on time to stop Joshua versus Fury from happening.
Look at where we are.
It seems like all that arbitrator's ruling really did was rob us of a major fight this summer. Rob us of a big summer blockbuster heavyweight showdown between two guys who we wanted to see fight for some time now. And in its place, this clusterfuck, this kerfuddle, this is what we got.
So in other words, no big heavyweight fight this summer.
I mean, that's the gist of it. If you're wondering why Big John Fury is characterizing the situation as such, that there's not much interest in this trilogy, well, that would be the why. That would be the reason both Bob Arum and Tyson Fury lost considerable trust with the boxing fans because they reassured us this wouldn't happen. And it did happen. And everything started moving rather quickly. It's almost like you were never going to fight Anthony Joshua, and you were leading us on all this time.
Why would they do that?
Who knows? The only thing that matters is that's how people feel. The paying public, the boxing community they're trying to appeal to with this trilogy that none of us were asking for.
I feel like they're being taken for a ride.
People feel like they're being lied to. Nobody likes that.
It's like this. I said this wouldn't happen. I said this won't go ahead on the 24th of July, didn't I? Because something will happen. It always does. You know what I'm saying? There's higher powers in boxing than the matchroom, ain't they? Because matchroom run around like a legless chicken doing all the work. Nobody's doing no others are doing anything. There's only him committing because he wanted to fight. But why the others wasn't committing, it's clear now. Because they knew it wasn't going to take place. And they knew that Deontay Wilder was going to be brought back into play at any time. But why on the 11th hour? I don't know. Politics of boxing again. It was the biggest turnaround I've ever seen. It took 2 years to even get close to making an AJ fight. 2 to 3 years. And all of a sudden, within 24 hours, done, signed, sealed, delivered, and on your way, right, you're fighting. In 6 weeks' time. Unheard of.
Are you really listening to what it is that Big John Fury is saying? He saw how these events played out. The collapse of the Joshua fight as a result of the arbitrator's ruling and the proposed fight date of July 24th. All of this signed, sealed, and delivered in record time. He looked at this and he thought to himself, there's no way the fight happens within that time frame. It all looks a certain way to Big John Fury, the same way it all looks a certain way to Eddie Hearn, the same way it all looks a certain way to me and you.
These guys never had no intention of fighting Anthony Joshua.
Big John Fury isn't blaming his son directly the way that me and you would, but it does sound like he's saying more or less the same thing that me and you have been saying, that perhaps there's some level of collusion going on here, because it's taken us a long time just to get this far, only for the fight to collapse, and 24 hours later,
You got a fight date?
we're hearing about venues, and all of the particulars are ironed out. Both parties are in agreement. I mean, you would have expected a little bit more resistance. You would have expected a little bit more of a fight from the top-ranked Fury side of things, given that the Joshua fight represented a greater financial value to the fighter than this fight does, but they seem oddly at peace with how everything broke down.
Don't seem too bothered by it.
So if you think about what Big John Fury is saying, that it's taken them so long to get to the point where they're about to fight Anthony Joshua, and how things broke down and the Wilder fight was very conveniently brought in record time. It sounds a lot like what John is saying, is that the top-ranked people perhaps never had any intention of
delivering the fight,
making that Joshua fight. They want the crown to stay in America one way or another. They never had any real intention of staging the Wilder trilogy on the 24th. That was never going to happen, because this is what Big John Fury is saying. The way all of this broke down, he wasn't convinced that the fight would actually come off on the 24th. Something will happen. There will be some kind of postponement. If you think about this on a long enough timeline, what that essentially means is if they knew the fight wouldn't come off on the 24th, that would make this entire COVID fiasco, COVID being the reason that the fight got postponed. That's the reason we're being given. That would make that fiasco a hoax. Don't misconstrue this. It was always their intention to stage the third Wilder fight, just not on the 24th. That perhaps the arbitrator's ruling came down right on time, in the nick of time, to stop Fury from fighting Anthony Joshua, but as far as the Wilder fight, between the time the arbitrator ruled and July 24th, when they were supposed to fight, well, that's not enough time to promote it.
and perhaps they knew that.
So they cook up this COVID story as a reason to move the fight to a later date. I mean, Big John Fury, he's got the same suspicions that me and you have.
Same suspicions as Eddie Hearn as well.
Eddie Hearn didn't believe it would happen by the 24th either. Eddie Hearn's questioned whether or not they even wanted to make the Anthony Joshua fight at all. But as far as the fight with Wilder going down on the 24th, he doubted it would happen the same way that Big John Fury doubted it would happen.
Big John is saying the same thing I said.
Eddie Hearn was running around like a chicken with his head cut off trying to deliver that fight, while Bob Arum and Frank Warren were sat on their armchairs doing absolutely nothing, throwing shade at the guy for trying to make the fight happen.
It looks a certain way to him the same way it looks a certain way to me and you.
It looks that way to Eddie Hearn, too. At minimum, you start to get the sense that you can't trust these guys, any of them. You can't trust Tyson Fury, Bob Arum, Deontay Wilder, or Shelley Finkel. Perhaps this whole arbitration was a hoax, and it was always their intention to do a third fight. They just wanted to waste Eddie Hearn's time, because they have a common enemy in him.
He was doing all the work anyway.